The gravel crunched beneath their boots as they stepped onto my property. Quiet, methodical, like they were on a mission. But this wasn't a mission, it was an invasion. They thought they could raid my land, take control of what was mine. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I could hear their whispered commands through the wall of my house, but I didn't move. I didn't rush. I simply sat back, letting them believe they had the upper hand. They had no clue what was waiting for them when they crossed that line. This wasn't a random attack. It was personal. It all started a few weeks ago, on a day that seemed like any other. The sun was just rising, the air was crisp, and I was sipping coffee on the porch, listening to the sound of my dogs barking in the distance. The tractor sat still in the yard, my animals grazing peacefully as I watched over my domain, the one place in the world that truly felt like home. No city noise, no deadlines, no distractions. Just me, my land, and the freedom to do as I pleased. I thought I was safe. I thought I had it all figured out. But sometimes the quietest moments are the ones when the storm is about to hit. And hit it did. I noticed the sign first. It was small, almost too small to see unless you were looking. A white plastic sign zip-tied to the fence near my front gate. I walked over and squinted at it. It read, "Notice, property under review. Compliance with Simmons Valley HOA required." My mind instantly went into overdrive. Simmons Valley? There was no HOA here. This was my land, my domain. The idea of someone telling me what I could or couldn't do on my own property felt absurd. I ripped the sign down without a second thought and threw it into the fire barrel. Problem solved, right? Wrong. The next day, I found another sign. Bigger, flashier, laminated and zip-tied higher on the fence. Under enforcement review. Violations pending. And that's when I realized this wasn't a joke. Someone was trying to make me comply with something that didn't exist. 2 days later, the woman showed up. Karen, the HOA president, dressed like she was on some kind of suburban crusade, wearing pastel pink and carrying a clipboard as though she was a warrior on a mission. She had this air about her, like she owned the world. She pulled up in a white SUV, parking it halfway across my gravel driveway, like it was her personal command center. I didn't even stand up from my rocking chair when she got out. I just took another sip of coffee and watched her. She made her way toward me, clipboard held under her arm, sunglasses blocking the full view of her face, but I could tell she was sizing me up. When she was close enough, she smiled like she was about to make some polite introduction, like we were going to talk about gardening or baking. "Hi there," she chirped. "I'm Karen Simmons, HOA president. Just doing my rounds. Thought I'd personally welcome you to the neighborhood." I blinked, not sure if I was hearing this correctly. "Help you with something?" I asked, not moving from my seat. "We're a chartered community coalition focused on maintaining visual and environmental standards," she said with a smug smile. "I'm here to make sure your property complies with our HOA guidelines." I almost choked on my coffee. "This is farmland, lady. The only standard here is whether or not my tractor still works." She didn't laugh, not even a twitch of amusement. "We have bylaws covering everything. Fencing height, structure types, livestock ratios, noise thresholds. Citations will start at the end of the month." I stood up, setting my coffee down slowly. "You can't cite a goat," I said deadpan. She didn't flinch. "We don't cite goats, just their owners." She handed me an envelope labeled "Welcome Packet. Action required." I didn't even bother opening it right then. I tossed it in the fire barrel with the sign from earlier and watched it burn. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning, I stepped outside and found even bigger signs, this time nailed to my barn door. And then came the men in khakis, 2 of them, both wearing vests with HOA patrol emblazoned on the front, clipboards in hand, walking my fence line like they were in the middle of a military operation. They might as well have had "Come at me," bro, written across their backs. I stepped out onto the porch, crossing my arms. "Something I can help you with, boys?" One of them straightened up, his voice shaky. "We're conducting a compliance sweep under HOA protocol." "Got a badge?" I asked, my voice cool. "We operate under the Simmons Valley Charter," he said, as though I should have known what that meant. I took one long look at them, feeling a rush of frustration. "Great. Then you're trespassing under the Callahan Property Charter. Leave." They hesitated, their eyes flicking nervously between me and each other. Then, they turned and began walking back down the fence line, muttering under their breath. One of them dropped his clipboard, and I grabbed it before they had a chance to get too far. Inside the clipboard was a map of my property. My name was highlighted in red. Alpha, high resistance. It was clear now. This wasn't just some small-town HOA dispute. This was something bigger, and they were trying to make an example out of me. I knew it wasn't over. I knew they'd be back. But what I didn't know was that this was just the beginning of a much bigger game, one I wasn't ready to lose. And I wasn't planning on going down without a fight. The days that followed were filled with tension. Karen wasn't backing down, and neither was I. Each day, the stakes got higher. I'd be on the porch, sipping my coffee, when I'd see the same white SUV roll by, always slow, always watching. They were patrolling now, making their presence known. And then, just as I expected, they showed up again. This time, not with signs, but with two men in matching khakis and vests reading HOA patrol. They walked the perimeter of my property like they were on a military reconnaissance mission, their clipboards tight in their hands. I wasn't about to let them think they could get away with this. I wasn't some soft target, not anymore. I watched them from the window, my mind working. The military side of me kicked in. I'd been in enough situations where the odds weren't in my favor, but I always had a plan. The trouble with these guys was they didn't even know what they were up against. I wasn't just some rancher they could push around. I didn't need a weapon. I had something far better, my brain. I wasn't going to sit back and let them turn my home into their playground. It wasn't long before I heard the crunch of boots on gravel again. This time, I wasn't just going to stand behind the glass. I grabbed my jacket, pulled on my boots, and walked out to meet them, my footsteps slow and deliberate. As I crossed the yard, I could see them freezing, unsure of what to do. "What's going on here?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, calm. One of them stepped forward, holding up a clipboard, his hands shaking. "We're conducting a compliance sweep. Under HOA protocol." I tilted my head, my eyes narrowing. "Got a badge?" I asked, stepping closer. The man's face turned red. He was clearly uncomfortable. "We operate under the Simmons Valley Charter," he said, his voice faltering. I smirked, the frustration bubbling up. "Great. Then you're trespassing under the Callahan Property Charter. Leave." They hesitated, unsure of how to respond. They weren't law enforcement. They weren't even real enforcers. They were just pawns in Karen's game, and I wasn't about to let them think they had any power here. They turned and walked back down the fence line, but not before one of them dropped his clipboard. I walked over, grabbed it, and opened it to see what kind of nonsense Karen had put together. Inside were maps of my property, notes, and a list of residents. My name was marked with a red X, followed by the words Alpha, high resistance. I knew then that this wasn't about some petty violation. This was about control. They were trying to take my land, break me down piece by piece. They didn't care about bylaws or livestock. They cared about power. And Karen had just declared war on me, thinking I'd roll over like the others. She didn't know who she was dealing with. That night, I made preparations. I wasn't going to let her intimidate me, not without a fight. I installed motion detectors along the fence, set up trail cameras around the barn, and wired up some lights that would flash if they came too close. Nothing that would kill or maim, but enough to make it clear that I wasn't going down without a fight. I didn't want to hurt anyone, but I did want to send a message. If Karen thought she could just walk onto my property and start pulling strings, she was mistaken. The next morning, I woke up early like I always did. The sun had barely started to rise, and the cool air hung heavy around me. I stepped out onto the porch, and for a moment, everything was still. But then, I heard it. The sound of tires on gravel, the faint hum of a vehicle engine, and a shadow moving across my yard. My heart raced. I knew it was them again. I didn't rush. I knew exactly what was coming, and I was ready. I grabbed my phone, and with one quick call to a sheriff's deputy friend of mine, I had the backup I needed. By the time the SUV had parked, the tension in the air was palpable. I stepped onto the porch, my boots firm on the ground, and I watched them through the window. They didn't know it yet, but they were walking into a trap. The SUV door opened, and Karen stepped out, her face all smiles, as usual. She had no idea that the tide had turned. She approached me, clipboard in hand, and greeted me like we were old friends. "Hi there," she said, her voice sweet and calculated. "I'm Karen Simmons, HOA president. Just making sure everything's still in compliance around here." I stood there for a moment, taking in the sight of her. "You must be joking," I replied coolly. She didn't flinch. She handed me another packet. This one, thick, official-looking, with action required printed in bold letters. I could feel the anger rising inside of me. This was the final straw. I had enough of her games. I grabbed the envelope and tossed it back at her. "I've had enough of your nonsense, Karen," I said, my voice low and steady. "This is my land, and you're not going to control it. I'm not backing down." Karen's smile faltered for a second, but she quickly regained her composure. "You're making a big mistake, Callahan," she warned, her tone now laced with something more sinister. "You don't know who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," I shot back. "And I'm not afraid of you." The confrontation ended there, but I knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. This wasn't just about some rules or bylaws anymore. This was about power, about control. And I wasn't about to let her take mine. The next day, things took a darker turn. The fake cops were back, this time with a plan. They had night vision goggles, walkie-talkies, and vests that looked like they were made for a military operation. But they didn't realize something. They weren't dealing with a normal person. They were dealing with someone who knew exactly how to handle people who thought they could push them around. And I was about to make them regret it. I wasn't just fighting for my land anymore. I was fighting for my freedom, and I wasn't about to let them win. The night they returned, I was already prepared. I had no illusions about what was coming. This time, they weren't just here to intimidate me with fake paperwork or bogus threats. They were here for something more. I could feel in the air, thick with tension, the kind that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The wind had died down, the silence heavy, broken only by the faint sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel. It was a different kind of quiet, one that felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I watched from the window, my eyes scanning the yard. The shadows moved closer, 5 figures dressed in tactical vests, black boots, and heavy gear. They didn't have any lights on, but I could make out their shapes through the thermal camera I'd installed earlier. They thought they were being stealthy, but I had eyes on every corner of my property. The movement was calculated, precise. They weren't here just to talk anymore. I took a slow breath and moved toward the back door. I wasn't about to give them a chance to surprise me. These weren't just random people. This was Karen's army, a group of enforcers who thought they could control everything. They didn't realize that the only thing they had was the element of surprise, and that was about to be taken from them. I moved through the house, checking my cameras one last time. Everything was set. The motion sensors were armed, the lights rigged to flood at the right moment, and the sirens were on standby. I had been planning for this moment for days. They weren't going to find me unprepared. They were going to walk right into my trap. The crunch of gravel grew louder as they approached the barn. I could see them on the cameras now, moving like a well-trained unit, spreading out across the property. It was almost too easy to predict their next move. I didn't rush. I simply slid on my jacket, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out onto the porch. The cold air bit at my skin, but I didn't feel it. My mind was focused. This was it, the moment everything changed. I didn't speak at first. I just stood there, leaning against the railing, watching them as they got closer. One of them looked up, spotting me. He froze for a moment, like a deer caught in the headlights. The others followed his gaze, and that's when I knew they realized something was off. They had expected to find a sleepy farmer too caught up in his land to notice anything. But they were wrong. I wasn't the victim they thought I was. The lead enforcer, the one holding the clipboard, stepped forward. "We're here to seize non-compliant property," he said, his voice rough but shaky. I chuckled, taking my time to respond. "You think this is legal?" I asked. He didn't flinch. "We have the right to enforce HOA rules. You've been warned multiple times. You're in violation." I shook my head slowly. "You're on my land, armed, and threatening to take what's mine under fake laws printed on a computer. This isn't legal. This is harassment." The others shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between me and the barn. I could see the tension in their movements, the uncertainty creeping in. They weren't prepared for a real confrontation. They had expected to intimidate me, but they didn't know that I had no intention of backing down. I wasn't going to let them take my property without a fight. One of them raised his hand, reaching for something hidden under his jacket. A taser. I saw the glint of metal, and I reacted without thinking. I moved fast, stepping off the porch and closing the distance between us. The flash of light from the taser arced through the air, but I was already too close. I grabbed his wrist, twisting it until the taser fell to the ground. "Don't even think about it," I growled. The others froze, their weapons still in their hands, but they weren't moving. I could see the fear in their eyes now. They hadn't counted on someone who knew how to fight back. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. One of them had reached for a walkie-talkie, likely to call for backup, but I was already ahead of them. I pressed the button on the remote I had hidden in my pocket, and instantly, the floodlights around the property flared to life. The lights hit them hard, blinding them with their intense brightness. The sirens followed, the sharp sound cutting through the night air. They stumbled back, their hands shielding their eyes, completely disoriented by the blinding light and the wailing sirens. But I wasn't done yet. I hit another button, and a burst of flashbangs went off from the corners of the property. The blinding light and deafening sound sent them crashing to the ground, their weapons falling from their hands. I didn't waste any time. I moved fast, grabbing one of their rifles and securing it. The others were still trying to regain their bearings, but it was clear they weren't prepared for the chaos I had unleashed. As I stepped closer, I saw the fear in their faces. They were realizing they weren't in control anymore. They were my territory now. "Get on your knees," I said, my voice steady. They hesitated, but I didn't give them a choice. I grabbed the leader by the collar and shoved him to the ground. "You're trespassing," I said, my voice low, "and you're leaving. Now." One of them attempted to stand, but I was already moving. With a swift movement, I twisted his arm behind his back and forced him to the ground. The others followed, one by one, dropping their weapons and falling to their knees. Before I could do anything else, I heard the sound of an engine in the distance. A sheriff's car. I knew who it was before the headlights appeared. It was Langston, the deputy I'd called earlier. He pulled up, his cruiser rolling in slow and steady, like he knew exactly what he'd find. The fake enforcers froze, their eyes wide with panic. Langston stepped out of the car, his sidearm drawn. "Drop the weapons," he said, his voice firm. One of the men reached for his taser, but Langston fired a warning shot into the dirt. The sound of the gunshot echoed across the yard, and the man froze. I said, "Drop the weapons," Langston repeated, his voice cold. The enforcers dropped their weapons, their hands raised in surrender. Langston walked over, cuffing the first one, and then the rest followed suit. "You're done," Langston said, looking at me. "They were never going to leave you alone, were they?" I shook my head slowly, my eyes scanning the men as they were led toward the cruiser. "This is just the beginning. They won't stop until they get what they want." Langston nodded grimly. "And they won't get it. Not while I'm here." As the fake enforcers were driven away, I stood there, feeling the adrenaline rush slowly fade. I had won this battle, but I knew it wasn't over. Karen wasn't the kind of person to give up that easily. She would be back, with more tricks up her sleeve. But I was ready, and the next time she came at me, I wouldn't just be defending my property. I'd be taking the fight straight to her. 2 days later, it happened, just like I knew it would. Karen wasn't one to back down, and now she had a new plan. I could feel the unease building inside me as I watched the sun dip below the horizon. The events of the past few days had set something in motion, something bigger than just her HOA nonsense. She had made her move, and I was just one piece in the puzzle. The sheriff's department had been involved, and Langston was on my side, but Karen was relentless. She had already started to dig deeper, searching for ways to twist the situation in her favor. And I wasn't sure what was worse, that she had the audacity to escalate this, or that she had a plan that reached far beyond anything I could have imagined. I woke up to the sound of my dogs barking wildly from the back fence. My heart raced as I bolted out of bed and rushed to the window. Sure enough, the familiar white SUV was parked in the gravel driveway, just like last time. But this time, something was different. There were more vehicles, several black trucks, their engines running low, parked in a line at the edge of my property. I knew immediately that Karen wasn't just playing games anymore. She had come with backup. This wasn't just some HOA dispute. This was a full-scale assault on my life. I moved quickly, slipping on my boots and grabbing the radio I'd set up for emergencies. I didn't need to see who was outside. I already knew it wasn't just her this time. I could hear voices now, loud, demanding, and too confident. I grabbed my phone and dialed Langston's number, praying he'd pick up. When he did, I didn't waste time with pleasantries. They're back. It's not just Karen. She's got a whole team with her. I need backup, I said, my voice tight with urgency. I'm on my way, Langston replied. Stay put. Don't engage unless you have to. I didn't need to be told twice. I wasn't about to make the same mistake again and face them head-on without a plan. The last thing I needed was for this to turn into an all-out war. But something inside me told me that this time, there was no way around it. This was it, the final confrontation. As I made my way out of the house, I saw them approaching the barn. 5 men, all dressed in tactical gear, their faces masked, and their movements too precise to be random. They weren't here for a chat or to warn me anymore. They were here to take what they wanted, and they were willing to fight for it. They had no idea that the fight they were about to face wouldn't be anything like they imagined. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the remote from my pocket and pressed the button. The floodlights around the barn blazed to life, illuminating the entire yard in a harsh, white glow. The flood of light temporarily blinded them, and that's when I knew I had them. The sirens blared in all directions, and the high-pitched wail echoed across the property, disorienting them even further. The men stumbled, trying to regroup, but they were too disoriented to move in any kind of coordinated fashion. I watched them through the windows, a smirk playing at the corners of my mouth. This was just the beginning. I wasn't just defending my property anymore. I was sending a message. These weren't just some rogue enforcers. This was a well-orchestrated operation, and it was clear that they had gone too far. Karen had recruited more than just a few neighbors. She had gone national. The name of her operation wasn't just about the HOA anymore. It was about control. They wanted everything I had, but they were going to have to fight for it. I moved silently through the house, checking the monitors. I could see them now, huddling together, trying to figure out what to do next. But they were too late. They'd underestimated me, and that was their mistake. I had already set the trap, and it was closing in on them fast. I stepped outside, moving carefully, knowing that I was running out of time. I couldn't let them get any closer to the barn. I wasn't going to let them destroy everything I had worked for. I walked towards them, staying low to the ground, my heart racing, but my mind focused. The first man saw me. He froze, his eyes wide with disbelief. But before he could react, I was already on him. I moved fast, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him to the ground. Not today, I muttered under my breath. I could hear the others moving behind me, but it was too late for them to stop me. They were trying to regroup, to push forward, but they were still caught in the disorienting effects of the lights and sirens. One of them tried to raise his rifle, but I was already on top of him, taking him down in one swift move. Another man tried to make a run for it, but he didn't get far. I tackled him to the ground, my hands gripping his vest tightly, pinning him down. They had come for my property. They had come for my life, but they had no idea what they were up against. I wasn't just some farmer. I wasn't some helpless victim. I had been through worse. And now, I was taking control of the situation. But just as I was about to secure the last man, I heard the unmistakable sound of an engine in the distance. It was Langston. His cruiser rolled into view, and just like that, the tide of the battle turned. The enforcers stopped in their tracks, their heads swiveling as they realized they were no longer in control. Langston stepped out of the car, his sidearm raised, and for the first time in days, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. He had come to back me up. I stepped back, watching as Langston took charge. He moved with purpose, shouting orders to the men. They dropped their weapons, their hands raised in surrender. The fight was over, but I knew it wasn't truly finished. Karen wouldn't stop just because we had taken down a few of her hired guns. No, she was already planning her next move. As the men were cuffed and led away, Langston walked over to me, his eyes narrowing as he looked around. This isn't over, is it? I shook my head. No, she won't stop. Not until she gets everything she wants. Langston sighed, looking out across the field. You're right, but we'll be ready next time. I watched as the sheriff's department took the last of the enforcers away. The storm wasn't over, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't backing down. Karen had made a serious mistake. She thought she could just walk in here, take what she wanted, and leave without consequence. She had underestimated me, and that was going to be her downfall. The next time she came, I would be ready. And this time, I wouldn't just defend my land. I would take the fight to her, and I wouldn't stop until I exposed the truth of what she was really up to. The battle was far from over, but I was done playing defense. This was war. And war, as I knew all too well, was a game I knew how to win.